Okay, welcome again to everyone who's joining. People are just trickling in, so okay, the meeting is now being live streamed. Welcome to everyone who's just joining. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat below. We're going to get started now. You can share where you're joining us from and maybe what your background is or what takeaways you hope to get from today's discussion. We have a full panel, so let's just jump right in. Yeah. So we're here today to discuss the challenges and solutions surrounding combating DDoS and its associated collateral damage, DDoS attacks and its associated collateral damage, together with Hub Security's very own Henk van der Heijden. He's the VP of Sales at Hub Security, as well as a number of other industry experts, including Jonathan Jaffe, Michael Smith, hello, Jonathan Srugo, Alon Nachmany, and Corey Still. So thank you guys all for being here today. We'll start our webinar off with a brief introduction from Henk, and then our panelists will each get a chance to briefly introduce themselves. Afterwards, we'll get a bit more into a deeper discussion on everything related to DDoS challenges and solutions. And as usual, we leave about 30 minutes at the end of our discussion for a short Q&A. So if you have any questions throughout the event, feel free to drop them in the Q&A section below or in the chat, and feel free to, to comment and to add your thoughts and generally participate in the ongoing discussion. Now we have an impressive lineup of panelists here today, and I'm excited to have them introduce themselves to you. But first, we'll begin with a few words from Henk, the VP of Sales at Hub Security, a VP of Sales, and we hand off the mic for introductions after that. So Henk, why don't you take it away?
Thank you, Stanley, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, for whatever it is at your location. First of all, I would like to thank you all for joining us here at Hub Security event and spending some precious time discussing DDoS and the collateral damage. As Tony mentioned, we have an excellent panel this time around, but let me start by telling you a little bit about me. So I'm 57 years, as you can see from my gray hair, and actually since Corona, I also have a gray beard. I worked 36 years in the IT industry for large global organizations. My first 20 years, I was generic in IT. I was started as a COBOL programmer. For those of you who know COBOL, it was dead 36 years ago, but it's still alive and kicking now. So if you still want to earn a decent salary, that's an area also to go besides cybersecurity. Since 2000, I would say I've been involved in cybersecurity, or what we call info security at that time, working for large American companies and about 10 years for Israeli companies. So currently my job is VP Sales, EMEA, and head of EMEA. We'll be building out the region. We're working a lot with our 1,000+ customers on the several topics of cybersecurity, and we try to help them become more secure and actually mitigate some of their major risks. We also deal at this point in time with customers, obviously, that are involved or trying to protect themselves against DDoS attacks. We've seen I would say a second or third wave of DDoS evolution, and hence a very interesting topic also for today. Hub Security, for those of you who don't know, have solutions in this space to help you assess and mitigate the threats that appear in this space, particularly, as well as others. So during this webinar, we'll provide further insight into the DDoS landscape by answering questions such as what are the ways to determine if your business is at risk, in what ways you can prepare your digital assets for an emergency itself, and what are the collateral damages, for instance, in cloud computing, and many, many more topics that will come up. And as Jenny said, please share additional questions in the chat box. We'll be happy, and we have a huge and excellent panel to take up on any question that might arise. Even more, if we talk about the damages and the risks, we also would like to discuss and share mitigation strategies that you need to consider as an organization. I'm looking forward to a very nice interactive session with lots of learnings. And with that, I thank you again for having us all at this panel, and bringing back the mic back to you, Czerny.
Thank you, Henk, and thank you for joining us. This is my first webinar with Henk, so I'm excited. Let's do a quick introduction round, starting with Jonathan. Why don't you share a little bit about your background and expertise? What perspective are you bringing to the discussion today?
Since there are two Jonathans, I'll
yeah, sorry.
just assume.
Here you go.
No problem. Thanks, Czerny.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Okay, so I've been a technical practitioner since 1997. I did take a break midway through my career and became an attorney and practice privacy law related to technology for a while, and then I came back into security, and I'm currently the CISO at Lemonade. Lemonade is a full stack insurance company. We're, as a business, 100% cloud native. So the sorts of attacks that we're here to talk about, a company like Lemonade could be subject to in a way that other companies may not be if they're not really they don't have a large online presence.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Alon, why don't you go next?
Sure, and I want to say thank you, for having me on this amazing panel. So I'm Alon Nachmany. I'm the CISO and principal consultant for AZEN Consulting. I've been in this industry about 20 years. I've been a CISO 3 times now, not including AZEN Consulting, twice for a publicly traded financial institution, and once for a unicorn some of you may have heard of by the name of WeWork. I was employee number 200 there, and that made for some very interesting lessons. I've also spent some significant time on the vendor side. I've been a part of vendors like AppUX, Bromium, which is now HP, and Cyberbit, which used to be part of Elbit Systems. At AZEN Consulting, we offer a number of services to our customers like virtual CISO, cyber maturity assessment and planning, threat hunting, and breach response. But we also offer some unique services like corporate and board of director education, where we help educate senior management and board of directors on the importance of a sound security system. And we make sure to translate all of the cyber terms to financial terms and explain why CISOs would recommend a certain route, so kind of bridging the gap there. Another service that we offer is customer advocacy, which I refer to as kind of the reverse of customer success, where we help customers renegotiate and reclaim what is theirs from vendors who overpromise and underdeliver.
Nice. Thank you for joining us, Alon. The second Jonathan Srugo. Why don't you go next?
Hi, guys. Nice to meet you, everyone. And thank you, Henk, for reminding us of COBOL. I also do remember COBOL a little bit. Yeah, so I've been in the industry for almost 21 years now. I've been CISO of multiple organizations, director of technology. And unfortunately, I had to deal a lot with DDoS throughout my career. I saw some of the biggest attacks in the world dating back to 2013 and 2014. Practiced a lot of incident response and worked with some of the biggest DDoS mitigation providers in the world. But I think the most important thing is a lot of incident response experience and operational experience.
Super. Thanks for joining us. Corey or Michael, and there Corey and then Michael. No.
Sure, cool. So hi everybody, I'm happy to be here, and like Henk, I also started my career as a COBOL programmer way back in the day. I've been in the high-tech industry for about 25 years. I started off on the business side of things, managing extremely large global projects for Department of Defense contracts back a long time ago. Since that time, I was hired by Bell Canada. That's my current employer about 12 years ago to start the network security practice. So at that time, we had managed firewall, and we had a very basic DDoS protection service that was in place at that time. And so I basically had to start that practice from scratch. And since that time, we have security services from deployed within the network. We do on-premise security. We have cloud. We have a vast array of strategic partners that we go and we tackle things that are not part of the core network ourselves. And one of the very first new next generation services that I brought to market for Bell Canada was like a pure inline network DDoS service offering. So that's why I'm here, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Super. Thank you, Corey. Michael?
Hi, everybody. I am Michael Smith. I am the field CTO for Neustar Security Services. So as a company, we are a cloud infrastructure provider. We do DDoS mitigation services as a service for our customers, but we also run the world's largest DNS infrastructure, and we have a web application firewall that also has some DDoS benefits. So we deal with DDoS as an infrastructure provider, so we get attacked. And we also offer services to our customers to help them mitigate DDoS. I did not begin my life doing COBOL. I began my life as a Russian-speaking intelligence specialist. So it's been a little bit of an interesting year for me, as you might figure. A lot of memories coming back all at once this year. But I do a lot of cyber threat intelligence, specifically around DDoS. I've been studying DDoS since 2008 with a lot of the hacktivist attacks against the Church of Scientology. I was an incident manager during Operation Avenge Assange, or it was in 2010, it was all of the hacktivist attacks around WikiLeaks, if you remember back that far. So I was an incident manager for that. I was an incident manager for the large campaign that we call Operation Ababel, which was the DDoS attacks against the US banks and some others, but mostly US banks in 2012 and 2013.
Quite a CV. Okay, great. Awesome to have you here on the panel. I'm just gonna jump right into our discussion, and today's discussion will be formatted under 3 topics. So we'll start off with a general discussion about the DDoS market and the market or the services surrounding DDoS, as well as the technology. And for some of you who are new to the topic itself, it'll just give you a very general introduction. And then we'll move on to our second topic, which is challenges and risks, followed by approaches and solutions. So I'm just going to start off with the first question, and this is for the entire panel, so feel free to jump in and respond. Let's start off by just asking very broadly, what is a DDoS attack and what kind of collateral damage does it have the potential to cause? Corey, you're unmuted. Do you want to start us off?
Sorry, is that for me? Sure, I can take that. So a DDoS attack is essentially when a person of badness, let's call them a hacker, will try and stop or limit the effectiveness of your communication with your own customers, be it taking your service completely offline or degrading the customer experience to the state that people will eventually give up, right? So there's lots of collateral damage that could happen. Obviously, it'll stop any transactions that your customers would do with you. So that is money in, money out kind of thing, right? So that's the first impact. And then there's all kinds of other downstream impacts around brand degradation. Maybe they go somewhere else. Maybe they decide that maybe you're not as reliable as an organization as others in your space, as well as any time that you are spending resources in your own organization in fighting DDoS attacks. Those are resources wasted that you could be better spent doing something else in your organization, your entire reason for being as an organization, right? So those are the 3 high bucket levels of things that you have to deal with when dealing with DDoS attacks. And some of the studies that we have shows that anywhere from about 55 to 60% of people experience direct costs of DDoS, anywhere from about 10 grand up to about $1 million per attack. So, and that's just the direct cost. So it's very hard to quantify some of those, downstream impacts, but just the direct cost can be significantly high. So those obviously are huge costs, especially for a small and medium business, right? And some of those costs are very, very impactful on your business.
Let me add to what Corey said. For those of you who aren't familiar, the first D in DDoS is distributed. There's a standard denial of service attack, but then there's also one that's more difficult to deal with, and that's distributed denial of service, where your attackers are not coming from a small number of points, which is much easier to stop, but they're distributed and coming from many, many different points, and those require more sophisticated technologies. The other thing to add on to what Corey said, in addition to all of the harm that could befall a company, there is also an approach of extorting money out of a company to turn the pressure off and to remove the denial of service if you pay them money. So there's the additional harm.
Yeah, the DDoS ransom problem, in Canada anyway, is a relatively new thing. So that started about 3 years ago when I got the first sort of DDoS ransom letter posed to me from our customer saying, please help. Right.
Really, that's interesting. I saw DDoS ransom back in 2010. So right after all the WikiLeaks DDoS, it became, because that was in December, it transitioned into holiday season, right? So most retailers earn just swag figures, but 75% of their income between Thanksgiving or the end of November and January 15th. So the attackers knew the business cycle. And so I went from responding to one incident to a different kind of incident. And that was definitely the DDoS protection racket against e-commerce sites. And I've been seeing that since 2010 and even before that, right? I think that the thing about DDoS is that it's a lot of different reasons that you would DDoS a target. There's a lot of different reasons or motives that attackers have. Sometimes it's for money, so it's the ransom. Sometimes it's just to cause something that is noteworthy. So I did monitoring for quite a few World Cups, quite a few Olympics, other like large events like that. So today we've got the FIFA World Cup that's happening. And a lot of times you'll see attackers, especially if they're ideologically motivated, right? So hacktivists fit in there, where they try to cause an outage. That's secondary, right? What they really want is they want publicity for their cause, right? And I've seen that with the Tokyo Olympics, with the World Cup and Olympics in Rio. We're seeing it today, in fact, with the World Cup in Qatar.
In my
I just want to
comments,
add.
Oh, sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
No, and let's add, the recent one as well as the political statement. Yeah, so we had the EU just, I think this week being, DDoSed because they voted, against the Ukraine, against Russia for, for some matters. So, so the political side of the house is also there.
Yeah, and that's Killnet. We actually have been following Killnet. It's kind of a private group, but also what you'd think of as anonymous Russia. And we've been following them for some time. It's absolutely fascinating as a case study, where they're doing the functional equivalent of what I call seal clubbing, which is a gaming term, right? So they're picking targets that are lightly defended. So if you look back a month and a half-ish ago, they were attacking US state government websites, right? So I grew up in Idaho. We can pick on Idaho. They crashed Idaho's, the government of Idaho's website, okay? And caused a pretty good crash. And they did that for a handful of other states, but nobody cared, right? So they can turn around and they can, stick their flag and say, yes, we conquered this. We had success. We were wildly successful as attackers, but they didn't actually achieve their goal, which was to intimidate, organizations that they didn't like, right? And so
That's-
we've seen them go from target to target to target to try to get that publicity. I don't think they're actually winning that publicity war.
So Michael, I'll add to what you're saying, just like you said, Idaho, I think you're right, but they also, same group went after, LAX, I think it was like Atlanta Airport and the New York, New Jersey Port Authority, which is the 3 largest airports in the US. But to add to also what Corey was saying, I don't think DDoS is just to affect your communications with your customers. It's also to disrupt your own communications. And while we're seeing that, nobody cared, I've done some extensive work with airports on the OT side. I wouldn't be surprised if there's no middleware and that website is directly connected to some stuff, attacking that might have other consequences. And I think that's, as much as they want to plant the flag and create some buzz around that, I don't necessarily know that they're not actually testing out the systems to see, what else can they disrupt through a DDoS attack of just the website.
Yeah, I had a customer many years ago, and they're an e-commerce site, and they got hacked pretty badly. Okay, so the attackers had Active Directory accounts, and they were starting to steal data out of the web application, and they started to do the incident response piece of it, and they were doing pretty well, kicking the attackers out. The attackers turned around, bought a bot, and then use that to throw a DDoS at them. So you run into this kind of bad dilemma, right? Which is, well, do I fix the data breach problem and solve that, or do I go fight the DDoS because I only have enough staff to fight 2 of them? One
Sophie's
is a
choice.
long-term loss. Say again?
Sophie's choice.
Yeah. One of those is a long-term impact. The other is a short-term impact. You're going to go for the short-term impact, unfortunately.
Corey, let me move on to you. Do customers see DDoS as a great concern that they have to deal with, or do most think that they're not really a target?
I think there's 2 camps to that, right? One is there's the more mature organizations that obviously that know they're an attack because they're dealing with it every day. Those are the easier customers to engage with around DDoS protection services or DDoS protection technologies. Then there's the group that is, they know they have to do it because there's some regulatory or governmental regulation around you must have such and such protection. They're less concerned about the actual DDoS attack themselves, perhaps foolhardily so, but they just want some protection, whatever it is, as cheap as possible. And then you have the customers that don't really believe that they're a target, but they are actually a target. And those are the customers that require a little bit more education, a little bit more, proof to say that, hey, yeah, you are in fact a DDoS attack. We have customers covering every market segment, small, medium business across retail, manufacturing, government, all of that. And every single client that we have on our service has, hundreds, if not thousands of attacks a month.
Corey, let me ask you, so are modern WAF services not sufficient to block these? I mean, are the solutions not out there and that's almost 100%
right?
secure?
So I mean, WAF, WAF security is obviously a portion of the solution, right? It's not all of it, but certainly more, I would say more customers than not actually don't have a sufficient WAF solution, at least not within the Canadian space. Obviously, all of the major organizations you'd expect
if they buy a WAF, are they covered? How much are they covered? How much are they not covered?
Yeah, I mean, WAF focuses on obviously the focus on the layer 7 attacks, right? All the application layer attacks, but it doesn't matter. There are still elements that you will need. Pure volumetric attack coverage, as an example. The kind that just fills up your pipe and it doesn't really matter what you have in place, either in the cloud or on the network, you're still going to be targeted. So those are the type of things that you really need to watch out for, not just the application layer attacks, right?
Jonathan, I'd love to get your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, Yeah, I'd like to chime in on the WAF. Look, it's not historically WAFs have been intended to solve more application level problems. Indeed, as Corey mentioned, and now having an on-premise WAF, most companies are in the cloud hosting their services there, so it's not a magical pill that you swallow and everything will go away. It's a combined approach depending on the type of attacks you're getting. Most of the WAF technologies are now becoming more towards bot mitigation technologies, because we know that the attacks are being generated by bots. So the volumetric attacks will be generated by bots, and the key thing is identifying the way to identify the bots, not necessarily the WAF itself. So the idea is which challenge mechanism the technology is using, and the way by which you can reduce false positives. This is something very, very important that we haven't talked about, guys, is that it's easier to mitigate the attack than to prevent the false positives. And you have to be continuously very, very sensitive, especially online companies that are very, very sensitive to dynamic content on their websites. You have to be very, very careful about the adverse effects of the mitigation. So sometimes the attack might go away, but you've actually dropped 15% or 20-25% of your traffic. So you have to be very, very careful, and you have to have not only security monitoring in place, you have to have end user monitoring in place to identify what's the actual impact on the mitigation. Because if you're an online business, it doesn't matter if it's a technical outage or an attack, you have to make sure that the customer experience is still there, regardless of the reason.
It's not just customer experience. A lot of consumer-facing companies want different search engines and different rating engines and other services to scan their site. You have to be able to distinguish between those and actual denial of service attacks. Otherwise, you lose growth in your business.
Yeah. And once again, all dependent on your threat actor. If your threat actor is motivated enough, then it will take enough time to imitate your customer, to know exactly how to behave, to circumvent exactly the mechanism that you need to have. So it needs to be a combined approach. The WAF or the bot mitigation solution is not the.
I've got a technical question for the panelists. Do you guys, it's so easy to fake a user agent in a layer 7 request. Do you know of any good strategies or solutions to look out for those faked user agents? Because I'm trying to figure it out myself.
Yeah, there's device fingerprinting, right? And that's actually the definition of something called device fingerprinting. But what you do is that this particular browser sends this particular user agent. It has these headers in this order. It has these TLS capabilities or SSL. If you're old school, you can actually fingerprint the device, but it requires a lot of processing in order to compute that, right?
Are you talking? So when I think of device fingerprinting, I'm thinking of actually recording a device and saying, "Oh, I know that this device is different than the second device that comes." It sounds like what you're talking about is actually profiling a request as opposed to remembering the device.
Yes, you basically have a mapping of what that browser capabilities are, and you match it up against what that request looks like. So yes, and that changes. So you have to keep up to date with it. It's a little bit of a hard problem. They're doing that a lot, not necessarily in the DDoS space, but heavily in the bot management space.
Exactly. And you have to be careful about that device fingerprinting as well, because if it's a parameter that's passed back, it could be manipulated as well. So I've seen technologies that actually use information from the back end, not only from the client side, to measure the length of the session. If the movement of the mouse is something that looks like a bot or a human, again, it gets very, very sophisticated. And I think the most important thing is understanding your business baselines, understanding their traffics, understanding your peaks, understanding your regions, and collecting all that information to create a strategy. It's not only a technical solution. There's a lot of important engagement with your business units, because your business units know better than you how the traffic will look like, where it will come from. So I think, and this is something that we haven't talked about yet, is how do you engage and how do you prepare even before? what are the things you need to do to be ready also with your business and your first frontliners from a service perspective to be able to prepare for an attack and to behave during an attack, to be able to communicate with your customer that something is going on. This is something really, really important.
Yeah, one of the back a couple months ago, I put out a white paper, right? So going back to the original question of, is WAF everything, right? So cloud WAF, yeah, it's pretty good. But in my white paper, I laid out 6 different technologies / architectures / designs that people could use to mitigate DDoS. And they start with over provisioning. So you just buy a bunch of servers and a bunch of bandwidth, helps against small attacks, right? Cloud WAF is in there, but as it says on the tin, to use the UK phrase, a web application firewall or a cloud WAF only protects web applications, right? So that leaves a lot of other attack surfaces out there. WAFs also have to have an authoritative server that they send that they forward that request to. And if you know where that's hosted, you can just attack that directly. And there are different ways to find that out. So great tool. But ultimately, the conclusion of my white paper is that, yes, the people that get attacked a lot, that defend a lot, they will use 2 or more different technologies. Maybe it's a third-party scrubber. Maybe it's a scrubber from their ISP. Maybe it's a cloud WAF. Maybe they'll do that in combination with some black holing. But they will use 2 or more of those technologies in order to balance each other, because everyone has strengths and everyone has weaknesses.
Actually, you hit on a nice architectural point, Michael, and it's you should never let your origin server be directly accessible.
So true.
I'd like to just jump in and offer that we move on to our second topic. I mean, we've jumped around a lot at this point, so I don't know. I think we segued already. So I just wanted to try to do a little moderation, if it's okay. Yeah, because we don't have a lot of time, and it would be nice. I mean, I think if we sat around and talked, we could probably talk for 3 hours, but we have limited time today. So I'm going to try to moderate a little bit more. Henk, can you share your experiences regarding some of the risks and challenges involved with DDoS attacks?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges, and we touched upon it in the discussion just now, is how do you go about assessing your risk, understanding really where you are, what are the mitigation areas that you can focus on. Because what I see from my customers a lot is either they focus on the protect side of the house. So I like to use, and we like to use the NIST framework, where you look actually at the 5 different areas of protecting a certain risk and identifying that. A lot of companies just jump into protecting themselves or think that they are protecting themselves. So I think it's important to look at all 5. So just to repeat, the identify, so assess what is your risk, what is the capabilities out there, what are you trying to protect, and what is the current infrastructure solutions you have in place, and assess them whether or not they are already doing a good job or not. So that is the first one. Second one is obviously the protect stage. There are a lot of solutions out there. We discussed one of them is WAF, but there are lots and lots more and more. And again, I think another topic that we're seeing is that customers just think that if they are with an ISP or with one of the protection solution areas, that they are safe. So I think that's a big risk because it's something like you think you're safe, but you're actually not. Yeah, so you're unaware of the risk. The third one is to detect if something is going on. So how early can you see that actually you're getting into a DDoS attack, so that you can then respond to it and behave and have procedures, teams ready to be able to respond. And once you're done with responding, making sure that you can recover again. So I like to use that framework, and I think customers need to focus on all 5 of those areas to really properly defend themselves and deal with DDoS attacks in general.
Mhm.
I have a feeling that Jonathan's got something to say about the ISP protection.
Oh,
Yeah, Jonathan.
yeah. Well, anyway, just one comment about the ISP protection, because I think that, you know, today many ISPs provide or attempt to try and go into the DDoS mitigation capabilities. And for me, it's more about the effort of the community of ISPs in an attempt to share more information and protect, you know, whether it's at the country level or whether it's at industry level, because I think going back to what Henk mentioned as well, there's no such thing as safe nowadays. And the best way to deal with such an ecosystem as environment is to collaborate, is to share information, threat intelligence, techniques. And I've recently been following a lot some interesting projects that have been going on the past 2 to 3 years within ISP communities, that where they share information and they protect each other. And I think this is the only way forward. I mean, not the only way forward, or one of the best ways forward in combating cybercrime in general, is creating small pockets of communities, whether it's in the national security level of governments, whether it's of specific industries that are more targeted, or whether it's at the regional level, trying to combat things together. Because if an organization tries to deal with cybercrime by itself, it's, you know, it's going to be very difficult. So going back to Jonathan, yes, there are projects. ISPs are trying to do a lot more. There's some challenges, of course, in terms of agreeing on the protocols by which we should be sharing information, how we should mitigate information. Do I trust my downstream ISP to send me information that they didn't block traffic based upon? But I think this is the only way, and we have to embrace such projects, and we have to, you know, talk about these projects more as a community.
So I just want to add to Jonathan's point here. You know, when I was a CISO on Wall Street, I mean, our firm did about $6 trillion a year in trade. We ran one of the, at the time, world's largest extranets and provided pricing and so on and so forth. We also had an incredibly large edge environment. I think it was 20, don't quote me on this, but I think it was 26 different ISPs connected into us. You know, we're talking about consumer websites and web applications, just filling up the pipe and adding latency to requests on its own is a huge problem. And I think that's something that's, you know, incredibly overlooked in our industry. I think that's something that people don't necessarily think about. They think about, okay, so, you know, my importance is that my customers can go on my website and order, but what about my employees who have to fulfill those orders, who have to bill those orders, who have to, you know, order more widgets in order to be able to grow the business, and filling up those pipes. You know, again, going back to trading, I mean, we were measuring things in nanoseconds. Adding any kind of latency to any connection could be catastrophic. So that's definitely something that we need to think about, and something that, you know, we're talking about ISPs and all of that adds another layer onto things. So I think there's another conversation or another set of calculations that need to happen. And of course, you know, I think we're overlooking the part of just intelligence. I mean, know your industry, know who's going after you, why they would go after you. You know, we spoke before about KillNet. You know, if you're an agency or you're a somehow associated with the government and provide a service, know that they're going to come after you, and obviously do the ROI calculations, and if it makes sense, protect yourself, but don't, you know, don't wake up the morning after and be like, oh, I didn't think this was going to happen.
Yeah, going back to what you mentioned, Alon, which is critical about the dependencies. So this is, I mean, we tend to sometimes lose ourselves in the world of cyber and everything, but let's go back to basics. Let's do basic business impact assessment and assess the dependencies of our services, of our business services. Like Alon mentioned, we've got incoming services from our customers. We've got outgoing activities that our internal staff need to combine. All right, let's segregate between them. Let's have, you know, redundant ISPs, different ISPs for employees of customers. Let's go back and identify the dependent service providers that we have. Just another example for most companies today that are moving to the cloud and using identity and access management providers from a cloud provider and are not using Active Directory on-prem. Imagine that your identity and access management provider goes down, you're out of business because you can't log into anything. So once again, going back to basics, has nothing to do with cyber. Do a business continuity plan, do a business impact assessment, identify your critical services, identify the dependencies of those services, and then start talking about the technology behind it and how you go down. And many people just forget about that because they jump right into the technology aspect, but there's a whole business aspect that is really critical in DDoS as well, which is part of your business continuity planning anyway.
Exactly. That also, just to add to that, there's also seems to be some kind of blinding reassurance that, oh, I'm on SaaS, so I don't have to worry. It's not my problem now. You still have to connect to the SaaS. You still have to be able to go out to get to it. You know, you're adding another yes, you're protecting your applications that you use, but what about how you get to them? And I think that, you know, people, like you said, you know, a lot of it is just overlooked.
Well, and
Great.
resources are scarce, right? You're not going to be able to protect everything to the nth degree, right? So
Of course.
Jonathan's point, right? You need to understand those critical parts of your business and what you could do without in case if something went down. What are those elements that you could live without? What are the things that are your entire reason for being? Right. Obviously, if you have a time sensitive transaction system, that's pretty important, right? So you need to protect that, but all of your protections on that maybe and less so on some sort of whatever internet access for your employees or something to that effect, right? So, but you need to know your own business and you need to know the criticality of the systems that you are supporting yourself and your customers with, right?
On that note, Corey, how would I approach the DDoS problem if I have a requirement for multiple connectivity providers?
Yeah, so multiple connectivity providers obviously is slightly more complicated, but it's a layered approach, right? A best of breed, and again, it's everything comes down to cost. You can't do everything, but in an ideal world, you would have a layered set of security, right? You'd have pieces of it on premise. You'd have pieces that you would try and rely upon your ISPs. So different ISPs have different capabilities. Maybe that's too complicated for you as an organization to manage, in which case then you would obviously there's very good cloud providers that provide DDoS protection today that you can utilize as well as an on-premise piece. But again, it's about, what are you doing with particular portions of your business? Is this something we need to protect in an always on fashion? What's the latency associated with that? Is that gonna harm me? Those kinds of things. But essentially it's a layered protection. So when I'm talking to customers, right, there's a couple of different approaches you can take when you have multiple ISPs, right? And again, it depends upon what industry you're in and what kind of regulatory elements that you need to provide. So there's some industries in Canada, as an example, that they must have, multiple connectivity providers. So obviously for companies like Bell, connectivity is king, right? Like that's our whole reason for being is around connectivity, right? So understanding that, right, there's a multiple different ways that you can deal with that from a customer perspective, right? You can treat one of your circuits as primary, right? And you protect that protect that circuit to the nth degree. And then if you have the ability to, in times of an attack, shut the other ISP off and force all the traffic back over to that single ISP, then maybe that's an approach that works for you. It saves a little bit of money, not having to protect as much on that secondary link, and then providing that protection. But in cases where that's not possible, either, there's regulatory compliance issues or there's internal policy things that for whatever reason a customer deals with, then you have a cloud piece. But I'm also a very big proponent of having on-premise protection for those particular environments that you deem absolutely critical for a couple of different reasons. One, you can be very much more granular than, say, a cloud protection could offer, or even an ISP protection and inline protection could. You have a much more control over it. You have much more visibility into that. And you can do other, other things that you typically wouldn't do within the cloud, like outbound bot detection as an example, right? As another layer of detection of elements of badness within your network, right? So, but it's in an ideal world, it's a layered approach, and how many layers you can put in obviously is a direct result of what your budget and how critical those systems are.
Michael, in a hypothetical world, I have a financial services customer that takes the average size of a transaction and the average number of transactions per minute and uses that to compute the cost of a DDoS attack. Is this a valid way to measure its impact?
It is, to a point, right? So I've had payment processing customers that they use that exact model, right? So how many transactions do you have per minute, per hour? What's the average size of that transaction? And they compute out what, how much does a minute or an hour of downtime actually cost us? Excuse me. And then they use that in their calculations for how much do they want to actually spend in mitigation to protect that. That works to a point, but it doesn't take into account business cycles and criticality during business cycles, right? So we talked about e-commerce. E-commerce get swag figures. They get about 75% of their profit or margin from the end of November through the middle of January. That's a known thing. We have other events like Eid or Ramadan. That's a big shopping season, especially inside of Malaysia. Inside of China, they have Singles Day, which is 11/11, because it's all ones. It's 1/1/1/1/1. And so that's a shopping day for some of the vendors that are there. So you have these business cycles, and what you find is that even live events, right? So World Cup only happens through the course of 2.5 weeks, right? Or the Olympics is, 2.5 or 3 weeks. And so if your business is focused around this one particular event, that event is incredibly critical, but the rest of the year, maybe not so much, right? Maybe you can take an outage. So yes, it's a valid equation, but you also have to tailor it for when do you actually need that availability 100% of the time.
If I may add to that, we spoke about it a little bit earlier about the direct cost, but there are some things that we sometimes overlook. How about acquisitions? How about new customers that would want to come into the website when we are under attack? How about the incoming calls to our support staff? If we're under a DDoS campaign for weeks, do we need to bring in some more support calls or more support staff to work over hours because there's more inbound or influx of calls coming in to try to answer questions? How about PR? Do we want to send out some PR to our customers? Do we want to give them, I don't know, some sort of, depending on the industry, some sort of promotion at the end? So all of these things are things that we're not looking at. They're not direct, but we have to look at the overall cost. Yeah. We spoke about it, I think Corey mentioned that earlier. How about the people sitting and not working because the communication lines are down? So there's so many different aspects of business impact that needs to be calculated when assessing the overall business impact. You cannot forget those things because they will bite you at the end.
And what's really interesting too is really unique use cases that I find incredibly interesting, right? Like something like a school, right? Schools often use internet-based phones now, right? So everything is based on the internet, right? Okay, well, what happens if a school is under DDoS attack and they can't call out because there's some critical event happening, at the school, right? So they need to inform every parents or God forbid 911 or police or whatever. Hey, that's a critical event that you need to protect against, right? So these things that even some of the school boards, like in Canada, don't really fully appreciate the level of impact and risk they have associated with those attacks.
Yeah, I wanted to get to our final topic because we don't have so much time left, which is approaches and solutions. And we've been talking, I think we've mixed between all the topics by now. But Jonathan, I start with you. What are some important tactics that organizations can keep in mind to apply before, during, and after a DDoS attack?
Is that Jaffe or Srugo?
Srugo, sorry.
Yeah,
No
so
problem.
cool. So first and foremost, again, assuming we have anticipated that we are under threat and we need to take this seriously, going back to what Henk mentioned, incident response plan. We have to have an incident response plan. We have to create an incident response team. We have to nominate people that have operational experience and are capable to work under pressure. We have to empower the people, the technology people, and the people that are either incident commanders to be able to make decisions. I mean, I've been in hundreds of incidents where you've got, if there's no, if you're not empowering the person to take the call, then people are looking at each other. What should we do next? What should we do next? So you have to trust your incident commanders. You have to empower them, and you have to train them continuously. During the attack, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, no, I was just going to add to what you're saying. I've dealt as a CISO with 2 incidents. BCDR as a topic is so incredibly underrated, and it is so important.
Yeah.
And to what you're saying, fail to plan to fail is really what's going to end up happening.
Yeah, I guess it's just a matter of depending on the background. I mean, some of us have served in the military, so you're used to the fact that you need to practice and plan for everything, and you practice, and then you get things not always perfect, but you minimize the damage. Now, just going back to during the attack, again, listen to those incident commanders, communicate with your business units. What's happening with customer support? Are calls going up? What's happening with sales? I mean, it's not only a technical thing, guys, it's a business thing. Is the CEO aware of what's happening? I mean, should we keep people informed? Create a command center that, is able to understand what's happening, and be truthful with your customers. There's nothing to hide. If you're a victim of a DDoS attack, you say it. We're undergoing a DDoS attack, we're mitigating the issue, blah, 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 blah. There's no point. Your customers will put more trust in you if you are, if you are transparent. And we've seen that with many, many organizations in the past. Now, a few tips for after the attack. Obviously, praise the people. It's not easy to be mitigating DDoS attacks. Sit down with your people, thank them, make sure they're calm, speak about it. There's a lot of emotions afterwards. It's something that is a bit catastrophic for some people in the beginning. So embrace your people. Do a post-mortem. What did we do good? Where can we, what did we do bad? Where can we improve? Talk to your mitigation providers. How is the mitigation? How quickly did they mitigate? Did it impact our services? Did we have any negative impact on the customer experience? How can we improve? Let's talk about social media. Maybe we want to give customers a promotion and go back to our, the customers that we have good relationship with, explain to them what happened, keep them in the loop. Again, it's nothing to be ashamed about. The more transparency you show, I think the better you come out as a brand. So, and again, this is something that needs to be planned. It's something that needs to be rehearsed and practiced. And it's never ending. It's part of our life. It never stops.
Michael, with DDoS coming in cycles where sometimes nobody is attacked and then everybody is attacked, how does it affect the economics of defending against an attack?
Yeah, so there's this pattern that's out there, right? And you'll see this in some industries. Some people get attacked all the time. I've got one hosting provider customer that gets attacked, I don't know, like 50 times a week. It's pretty regular. But with most industries, you have 2 years where nobody gets attacked and things happen, right? Like you're like, well, you know what? We didn't use, your CFO comes to you and he says, look, we didn't use this DDoS mitigation solution, whatever it was, right? We didn't use that last year. Do we need to renew it this year? And you're like, maybe not. I don't know, right? you have operations staff that rotate out, right? So, like, let's face it, you work in a NOC or a SOC, so network operations or security operations, and, you're going to change jobs every 2 years, right? And so your staff is rotated out, and maybe things have changed. Maybe you've done router upgrades, you've done application upgrades, and you haven't tested, does your DDoS plan actually work? And so then what happens is there's a period of 2 years where everybody gets attacked, right? So number one, it sucks to be the first one to get attacked because you're like, oops, completely surprised out of the blue. Here comes the Krasnovian human wave. They're flooding us out. But one of the things that I'm doing a lot right now is looking for customers. So we can profile our customers and say, show me customers that are on-demand customers, right? So we're out of line until they decide that they've gotten an attack, or we monitor and detect an attack, and then they swing that traffic to mitigation, either through BGP or DNS, and then we mitigate it and we send it back to them. But find customers that have never onboarded, so they're on demand, they haven't onboarded in the past 12 months, okay? Find me customers that have not received an attack in the past 12 months or 6 months, and let's go have a conversation with them. Because
or even better, Michael, bring in your niece or nephew and have them actually attack them, just a little attack to show them that this could really hurt.
No, but there are companies that provide this as a service, and by companies that provide it as a service, I don't mean my Russian friends, okay? Right, I don't mean kill them. But there are people who do that, but it's very expensive to test, right? Like it might run up to $30,000 for a single test, stretching over 4 hours, because it's bandwidth intensive, right? The attackers have free bandwidth. They don't care. But I'm finding these customers, and then we're having a conversation about, hey, can you just on-ramp to make sure that you still have the capacity to do that, to make sure that your operations staff actually has the, has the ability and the knowledge base to do that. And then I'm almost looking for ways that we can add value to that customer outside of them receiving attacks. So being able to share intelligence is a huge thing. That's why when Killnet started to attack US targets, we gathered up everything that we knew about Killnet, put that all together into a threat brief, and gave that to my account management folks, my account teams, my customers, as kind of this outreach from us to say, yes, this is happening. Here's what we know about it. Could you be a target? Well, here's traditionally what their targets are. Here's who they are. Here's the techniques that they use. Basically everything that we know, in order to, number one, just give touch points with them, so that, instead of like once a year we show up and we're like, hey, time to renew your contract. But to add value to them, even if they're not getting attacked, to give us a touch point so that we can talk about testing. And if you're concerned about this, then let's talk to us and we'll do architecture reviews. We can do a tabletop exercise. We can do an on-ramp and sample mitigation. We can do a bunch of things. But to create that.
Sorry, Mike, I'm gonna interrupt you. I actually forgot what the original question was. I think we've weaved around
cycles and economics, right?
So I just want to comment also and add to what Mike was saying, because I think testing has a very, very important element here, guys. And I'm not talking about, regardless of how much testing costs, you can do your own testing. I mean, again, going back, if you have your own private data center, you don't have to use bandwidth. You can create a DDoS testing machine within your data center upstream or just beneath your routers and simulate attacks inside your data centers and play kind of the red team, blue team type of approach. And you can do this by yourself. Of course, you have to make sure that somebody's moderating it and make sure you don't accidentally download malware or crash your environment, but don't do this in production. If you're doing internal DDoS testing without a professional company, you can do this in your, other environments. But testing is key, is really, really key. And it's not only technology testing, once again, scenario-based testing. escalation-based testing, response-based testing, tabletop exercises as well. And yeah, I mean, you can get creative and do, you can do it by yourself if necessary as well.
Thanks, Jonathan. So I want to just ask one or two more questions, and then we'll move on to our Q&A. And if you guys haven't found the Q&A button, it's okay. It's at the bottom of the screen. You can also drop your questions in the chat box. Yeah, we'll see them there too. So yeah, one of my final questions, Jonathan, so what would organizations need to do in order to identify if a DDoS attack applies to their threat landscape? And how can they quantify the risk level that's applicable?
Which Jonathan?
Srugo.
Okay, so very, very quickly, in terms of if it's applicable to me or not, number one, intelligence. Talk to your colleagues. Are they getting attacked? Build those small communities. Try to look if somebody is conducting some sort of reconnaissance on you. Speak to your business stakeholders. Try to understand if something coming up. Maybe we have some sort of campaign or some new revolutionary product that we want to launch that we should be prepared. Take a look, and that's something that I've been doing recently. Very, very interesting. Start reading cyber insurance claim reports. You'll be able to see who's claiming for attacks. So start seeing your industry. Who's claiming? So, and then obviously look at your business continuity plan and business impact assessment to see what is the overall damage. Again, going back to how much money, or I mean, what is the impact? Again, we've discussed about this a lot. Operational impact, revenue, reputation damage. Okay, if we go down for 4, 6, 7, 8 hours, what's the churn rate? So there's various techniques. It all goes back to risk management, right? Probability, impact, how much money. So yeah, but definitely starts off with intelligence, talking to people, talking to the community, asking your peers, your colleagues, combination of people, process technologies, not only tech.
I'd love to add to that. One of the things that I think we haven't spoken about here is, ultimately, and the board of directors is kind of the truly what's going to dictate whether, they're going to assume the risk, they're going to, approve the budget, whatever it is. I think taking what Jonathan Srugo is saying and informing, briefing your board, especially if you have, like you said, an event coming up and you're gonna, you're launching a new product or whatever it is, making sure the board is apprised of what's going on, what are the risks that are facing the company, and ultimately, again, it all comes down at the end of the day to ROI in dollars and cents, but making sure they're apprised, documenting it, obviously, because I think that's something that's definitely on CISO's minds today is how do I ensure that I may have done everything right, but I'm still culpable. What are you doing for presenting to your board on here's the intelligence that we had? You said reading the insurance reports. I think that's a great example. Summarizing that information and putting it in a packet that your board members are aware of and understanding, hey, we want to spend X dollars on DDoS. Hey, I heard about DDoS 15 years ago. That's not a thing anymore. Well, actually it is. And giving them that information and arming both yourself and your board to make the proper decisions, I think is incredibly important.
And for a final question before we move on to Q&A, thank you, Alon. What are some of the key questions to ask of any DDoS provider before purchasing a solution from them? And how should organizations measure the effectiveness of the various mitigation solutions that they offer?
Can you fully protect me?
Yeah, I was going to say a little more crudely, does your shit work?
Touche.
I'm gonna say something. I hope I'm not gonna get some of the providers on the call upset. But I mean, again, you have two things that are really, really important. Is that what happens when you are going always on and you're being mitigated? Is my traffic, when I'm not under attack, is my customer experience going to be impacted because they're moving me to a cheaper ISP because they want to reduce their costs. So this is something really, really important. You have to check out which internet service providers they use. I mean, how many internet service providers they have. This is regarding performance. I always like to check and talk to the research team. I like to go and see who are the guys sitting in the SOC. What are their capabilities? Do they even know how to use packet captures? Are they conducting research? Are they sitting in the communities? Are they identifying? Are they testing themselves? I mean, you don't want to, and that's one of the most frustrating things, is that you're under attack. The mitigation provider is trying to apply some sort of mitigation. They've killed 50% of your traffic, and you're trying to get on the phone to them and tell them to stop mitigating the way they are, and they won't answer the phone, right? Because they have 50 customers. I would recommend to get a personal account manager that is your stakeholder inside your mitigation providers, because you want somebody that's advocating for you, for your organization within the mitigation provider. They have 50, 100, 200 customers. And if it's worth, and it's worth the money, it's that attention is worth the money, really, really worth the money.
And when you're talking about technology, right? So services is one side. Obviously, the latency is appropriate, is a key one in terms of how much latency is it going to take for me to get my traffic to and from my provider, if it's always on, if it's on demand, whatever. That question is obviously important. But when choosing the actual technology, if you're going to manage it yourself, if you're going to deploy it, if you're going to work with that technology provider, right? Things like, how do you determine an attack? What's the approach there? What happens if I get a huge spike of legitimate traffic? How do you deal with that huge spike that may all be legitimate? How do I know you're just not going to rate limit that experience away, right? How does that happen, right? How does that technology evolve over time? I want to see the roadmap. I want to see the things that are coming, because the attack types, the attack vectors, the combination of vectors are always changing. So the technology needs to be adaptive. It needs to be behavioral in nature. And the provider needs to show that they actually understand that space. They reduce the latency within the actual box itself, or the cloud provider, or the virtual service, or whatever it is. And they have a roadmap to evolve as the threat landscape evolves.
Yeah, my one thing before you go shopping for vendors is to understand what assets you have and what things you want to protect, right? Because that gives you what options are available. And there's some things that are good for general purpose, right? So appliances, scrubbing services, some things that are for specific use cases, like a cloud web application firewall, or even over provisioning on a cloud provider. But understanding yourself first, what assets you have, and then ask the provider, because assume that you'll need multiple strategies to deal with DDoS. So ask your provider how they work as complementary technology to the other pieces of that strategy that you're going to have.
Yeah, that's good.
Right. So a good example is to use a third-party scrubber in combination with a cloud WAF, right? Very common. So how does that work? So if I'm going to use this cloud WAF and you're a third-party scrubber, how does that actually, how does that work coming through your scrubber? What's the latency? How do they respond? Do they have a relationship with the other vendor? There's a lot of things that you come to, but you have to start with understanding what it is that you're going to protect.
Absolutely.
And I think latency is definitely, for me, it's always a big issue just because of my background, but I think it's something that's definitely overlooked. So it's definitely something that people need to be cognizant of.
Super. Should we move to Q&A? Let's segue to Q&A. We don't have many questions at the moment, so if you are thinking about a question and you haven't put it in the Q&A yet, I would recommend you do it now. There's no bad or stupid questions, so feel free to share. Yeah. Susan is asking, are you able to mitigate DDoS attacks in any protocol? For example, what about a SIP-based attack?
So yes. So you can mitigate any attack from any place. I look at it as two pieces of the equation. One is the traffic that you want to defend, that you want to protect, is SIP. So yes, right? Now the interesting thing with SIP, usually you're talking, usually you're talking phone or some kind of messaging, but usually you're talking, VoIP traffic or phone traffic of some kind. So protecting that as a service, yes, but it's very latency sensitive, right? So streaming video, interactive voice, things like that are very easy to interrupt when you add latency, right? That starts to lead to lag and buffering and a whole bunch of other stuff. So that's kind of an issue to consider there. But like anything, it's a protocol. And so the way that most mitigation works is either number one, they have a filter of some kind, right? So if you know that memcached is used for reflection attacks, there's no reason for memcached traffic to go out across the internet. So as a provider, I block that at my ingress, right? So I can block that and turn that off. So that's one way to do it. The other way is you count number of packets or packets per second. And that's usually measured in the millions. You measure volume of bits per second, and that's obviously usually measured in megabytes or megabits or gigabits. And you measure that, you do sampling, and then you filter based on that sample. So, and then there are other ways, right? But that's usually the two ways that you mitigate. So yes, you can mitigate against that. The other side of the equation is you SIP as an actual protocol of attack, right? So if I say, especially like UDP services, things like that, where I can do amplification, then the attack would be inside of SIP coming at me. That I can filter that out. The hard part is where the traffic that you want to defend is inside of SIP and the attack traffic is inside of SIP. It becomes a little bit harder to differentiate good and bad simply because of the nature of SIP. But yes, you can defend it.
Anyone want to add anything to that?
I think you did a great summary.
Okay. Sarthak is asking, can you elaborate, well, they wrote it in all caps, but I'm not going to yell. Can you elaborate the impact and risk management of DDoS? We just talked a bit about it in most of the discussion.
So yeah, I think we talked a lot about that. I think at the end of the day, it's listen, we're all here for business, unless you're here on behalf of a government, but it all comes down to dollars and cents, and it all comes down to understanding what your risk is, calculating the probability with the cost of the outage, and as Jonathan said before, and all of the overhead that may entail, that is often not thought about, and coming up with the number of this is how much it's going to cost me to protect. Do I pay less than this and protect it, or do I roll the dice, or if I'm incredibly risk averse and I'm in a government position, hey, do I actually overspend and protect it? So that's at the end of the day. I mean, that's the bread and butter of what I think a CISO should be doing, and really their true day job. And again, going back, presenting that and making sure that the powers that be are aware, and if they need to make that decision, like I said, we're more risk averse. I think that's a board decision to say, we don't want to roll the dice. We don't want to risk our reputation. We don't want to have the overhead and all of that other stuff, as Jonathan beautifully summarized earlier. That's how you come up with it. That's exactly the calculation that's there.
Yeah,
DDoS is not, there's nothing specific to DDoS risk management. Risk management is a topic. that needs to be looked at in general, and any threat or IT or operational, needs to
Weather.
it needs to funnel into that risk management framework, which the board can then needs to make a decision on. So there's no specific way apart from analyzing your susceptibility to DDoS, but in terms of impact, it's a business. There's common frameworks. I'm not going to name names of frameworks, but there's really common frameworks to assessing risk, and you should be using quantitative, as Alon mentioned, quantitative methodologies to assess the risk with money, not with colors, not with rainbows, not with
Feelings.
heat maps. Yeah.
Jonathan, I think you said it very well before about, a lot of people just missing kind of the other stuff and a lot of people not planning well. We were talking about kind of BCDR planning. I used to have an office in Dallas. Part of our BCDR plan was actually what happens when it snows in Dallas, because apparently nobody knows how to drive in the snow in Texas. And how many people, we're coming out of COVID or we're out of COVID, it depends on if you're in Florida or not. Here, COVID apparently never happened. But, a lot of people realize that, hey, a pandemic is also something that we need to plan for. And that's now part of a lot of BCP plans.
I don't know, that's so 2020.
I apologize. Well, apparently here it never happened, so.
Yeah, on that same note, banks prior to 2012, prior to September of 2012, I would go talk to them about DDoS mitigation and they'd say, you know what? We are not worried about DDoS at all. And the reason is because the fraudsters need our websites to be up and operational so that way they can attack it and steal money. That was their biggest threat, was fraud risks. Okay. And if you think about it, as a bank, well, they don't make money if their website's up, right? Like, yeah, maybe marginally, but they make money through interest, right? And
Might be better if the website's down.
It'd probably be better, right? Because people could take it, like people could not take their money. So that was right at the time. And then that changed in September of 2012 when Operation Ababel started, and banks became a target of DDoS. So that plan, that, like, yes, the risk changed, and there was a period of about 6 months where they all had to figure out how to do this DDoS game at large scale. And if you look at the Financial Services Information Sharing and Analysis Center, or FSISAC, it is a community where banks and other FSIs, they exchange threat information. Prior to 2012, nobody used FSISAC. Like, the first time somebody gave them a bit of threat intelligence, the people at FSISAC actually had a party and popped champagne corks and stuff. As soon as Operation Ababel started, everybody needed to get up to speed and get smart on how to mitigate DDoS. And suddenly everybody was using FSISAC, and there was a ton of information around what the attackers were doing. And specifically, something we haven't talked about today, which is DDoS is a different kind of attack. It stops when the attacker stops. It's not like in a WAF world, that attack stops when you detect that it's bad and you block it, right? In DDoS, the attacker can just hammer you for months at a time with a low-level DDoS. It really stops when the attackers stop it, when you destroy their platform, right? So you work with the ISPs, you work with the hosting centers, you work with upstream providers to dismantle the platform that they're using to attack, or when that attacker is put behind bars, okay? That requires coordination, it requires information sharing.
So, Michael, it's interesting about what you said about information sharing. I can tell you, when I was back on Wall Street, I remember them trying to set up all the information and have the information sharing. And I think we all buckled at the idea of I'm going to share information. What? No, we'll anonymize it. I still don't want to share the information. This is my information. I worked hard to collect it. And I think it's great that mindset is gone now. But that was definitely, you just reminded me of that, of how we did not want to do that. You know,
Yeah, objections are gone in one industry, in one geography. They still exist elsewhere, but yes, good.
fair enough. You know, I think one of the other things we haven't spoken about is, you know, we spoke about kind of OT and, you know, Killnet. Two things out of that. One is, you know, Michael, I think you spoke at the beginning about hacktivism. You know, I was recently working with a generator provider that provides generators for oil fields as they're being drilled. And one of their main concerns is those are smart generators, and they were worried about, you know, hacktivists coming in, and it wasn't necessarily hacking the generator. They were more worried about, you know, it has to send a heartbeat, and if it doesn't send a heartbeat, I guess it turns off to protect itself or whatever it is. You know, they were worried, hey, if we get a DDoS attack and this is, you know, that heartbeat doesn't make it through, not only how does that affect the generator, because at the end of the day, the generator is a very small piece of this oil field that's being built, but what are the implications of the oil field not having power, not being able to continue the drilling? Could there be some kind of back pressure buildup, and could it turn explosive? You know, I think that's one part of, you know, the DDoS. So we're talking about DDoS, and don't get me wrong, the consumer side of sales is incredibly important, and it's what moves our economy. But at the same time, there's a whole other side to DDoS. I think I read a statistic that, you know, there have been more than 3,000 DDoS attacks just on the Ukrainian government, and it's been in coordination with Russian plans of how they're infiltrating. So I don't necessarily think DDoS, you know, we're talking again about, you know, the business side of things, but it's become something that's part of a weapon. And I think that's definitely something that's worth mentioning here, and something that, you know, maybe is even worth discussing. What do you think about that, Michael? I feel like you're very opinionated there.
Yeah, I have tons of opinions. I try not to dominate the conversation. Try. But one thing that I've seen a lot is that web traffic, right? So I was the world's biggest user of the world's biggest cloud web application firewall for many years, right? And one of the things that is completely interesting to me is a field of study that nobody else has done a lot of research on, and that is an HTTP request is very asymmetric, right? So you send 200 bytes of a request, and it generates so much CPU, RAM, disk IO on a web server that it's very, very asymmetric. And so there's this whole school of DDoS that is web application DDoS, and not just get floods, but it's a hybrid between an application vulnerability and a DDoS attack. So what do I mean? Let's look at something. There's this process called pagination, right? So you want to look at a shopping cart. It's got a picture and a description and a picture and a description. Well, that resides inside of a database someplace. So I send a request that says, yes, I want to show, you know, men's t-shirt black. And the application server sends that query to the database. It gets a result set, and there's a limit, like maybe it shows me 40 or 20 or 50. But where there's a vulnerability in the application that allows me as an attacker to say, oh yeah, show me 9 billion, and that web application accepts it, and you've got this huge database result set, and then the application server has to parse it, that's a vulnerability in the application. But it's also something that I can take and give to a bunch of bots, and they go run the same query, and that becomes a DDoS with a server component and a non-server component. And so I've seen that in a couple ways, and I've built defenses against that. But also what happens is that attackers know that websites have web application firewalls, and those web application firewalls, or, you know, you're doing input validation or a bunch of things, they know that the defenses have, or that target has boundary protections. They will throw a low-level DDoS. It won't cause an outage. So their intent is not to cause an outage. Their intent is to cause small-scale outages in order to get you to turn your boundary defenses off. Okay, and this is one of the dirty little secrets of the e-commerce world is they have the big red button, and when their user traffic grows to a certain amount, they go in and they hit the big red button, and it turns off some of their security controls in order to accommodate that large influx of users, right? So as an attacker, I can use that DDoS in order to get you to turn things off to make it easier to attack you and do a data breach, or, usually it's a data breach, but, whatever other kind of application level attack that I want to do.
Alon, have you seen this?
Yeah, I have seen it, definitely.
Yeah, no, Alon, in your experience, have you seen this, especially because you're concerned about latency?
I have, and I've seen it where, excuse my French, when shit hits the fan, how do we scale back security in order to keep operations running? I think that's a huge part of it. And definitely, the whole latency part plays a part of that. I think Corey said before, everything's, kind of the layers of the onion. And as you tack on layers, you're tacking on latency. You sometimes have to chop half the onion off in order to be able to continue to run. You cut your arm off in order to continue the marathon. And that's a big part of it.
Super. I'm just going to come out and say it. I think that you, Michael, Jonathan, well, both Jonathans, Corey as well, Henk, sorry, you're the chop liver here, should have a podcast and just spend a few hours just talking about DDoS because I think it's really useful, all of your experience, and I think it's really interesting to. I think we could go on for a few hours, like I said. Sorry for all the moderation I needed to do. And with that, I need to wrap up also. So thank you guys for a really wonderful discussion. I'd be happy to do a part 2. We can talk to Lior, someone at Hub, and try to organize it. And I also would like to let the attendees know that within the coming days, you'll be receiving a email with the contact information for all the panelists that were here today. And so feel free to reach out to them directly and contact them if you have any other questions or comments that you wanted to bring up. And and I just wanted to say thank you again to our wonderful panelists, Jonathan, Jaffe, Henk, thank you so much, Jonathan Srugo, Michael Smith, Corey Still, and Alon Nachmany. If you guys want to stay up to date on future webinars, you can follow Hub Security on LinkedIn or Twitter, and you can also check out our weekly digest on Medium for the latest stories coming out of the cyberspace. Any other closing comments? Yeah, you're welcome.
No, I want to thank all the participants first for spending 1.5 hours with us, and obviously all the panelists on behalf of Hub Security. Thanks very much for this insight.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you, everyone.